So I'm in week 3 of my foundation yoga training. And the theme that often comes up is boundaries. And part of it is the necessity, if we are going to be yoga teachers or craniosacral therapists or energy workers or human beings, that holding boundaries that are true for us is imperative. And over the years, I've noticed that when I share this concept, I'll get lots of heads nodding or bewildered faces. And then as the training continues and I watch the interpersonal relationships, and as days progress, that there's still a confusion around boundaries. And I know for myself, when I first heard about boundaries, I was like, what are those? They're allowed? And so, of course, we all have different concepts of what boundaries are according to our conditioning and what was modeled for us. And a really simple way to think about boundaries is actually not think about it, but to feel it. And it's being honest with what feels right to us, to ourselves in that moment. So for example, at this moment, I need you at an arm's distance. Maybe it changes another time. I actually know now I feel comfortable with you coming a little bit closer. We have psychic boundaries, we have mental boundaries, we have emotional boundaries, we have physical boundaries. We have boundaries that we need to place within ourselves. Maybe we have negative self-talk or self-destructive behavioral patterns or ways that we spin out. So I also consider boundaries as the positive essence of masculine support. So what can be really helpful about boundaries, because I was watching my students the past few days as I developed role play, where one person wanted an object and would do anything to get it, and the other person who had that object, in their heart of hearts, could not give that object up. So it was interesting to see what came up within voice, posture, facial expression, and internal thoughts and perception. And a lot of times we'll feel, some of us, I'm not speaking for all people, but for people who have a hard time setting boundaries, they can feel like, oh, but I'm not being compassionate, or I'm being mean somehow. And I think it was Brene Brown, but I could be wrong, who said that the most compassionate people have the most boundaries. How I perceive that is, for example, I had a friend in my life where, an acquaintance that I wanted to be friends with, but honestly, there was just something, couldn't put my finger on it, but it just didn't feel right. I didn't feel safe around her. So one of the essences of boundaries is it's creating safety. And it's not something that's mental that, I can logically explain to you why. Sometimes we have that, but we have to go from the essence of what feels good to our nervous system to what feels good to our subtle energetic system. So I was noticing that in my rapport with her, there was a constant trespass of boundaries, and that I was always having to kind of set boundaries up, but I was still trying to be friends, and it never really felt right. And then finally it was like the straw that broke the camel's back, right? one more boundary was crossed, and I just found myself angry. And I just said, I'm done. That's it. And I just decided she is now at an arm's length. I'm done. And it was great because I felt this anger that just came up. And anger is great because when you feel that pulse moving through the system, usually, there's been a little trespass, and it's a current to help set boundaries. The moment I let myself own that this was actually the boundary I needed, I'd been pretending to, I gotta let her come in a little bit, but when I really just said, nope, arm's distance around full radius, no closer. Suddenly, everything became okay. I no longer had any issues with her. I could actually see in a very compassionate way, this is why she behaves that way. Suddenly the field was no longer personal. And it was great. So for those of us who have a hard time setting boundaries because we feel like we're being mean, and we feel like we're not being compassionate, all the time, being very honest about what actually feels right in the moment, it's not personal, actually keeps the field the cleanest. And suddenly, everyone has their space to figure this stuff out, the space to heal, the space for clarity, and we're no longer muddying one another. So we're able to stay neutral and not take things personally. And I had this vision right before talking about this of if we knew that setting boundaries isn't personal, even though sometimes we feel like it is, but if we really were honest with, okay, I am just being honest with what feels right to my system. For some reason, when this energy comes towards me, it can only come to this distance. I don't understand why, but for some reason, when this energy comes to me, it can come closer. I'm actually not going to think about it. I'm literally going according to feeling, and I'm listening to my field. And I'm just naming where the comfort zone is. Then suddenly everyone has their space where they perfectly belong. I think of it as like the most perfect song ever. Everyone has their place where they can play their notes. And the moment we have disharmony is when we're trying to play a note where it doesn't belong. And that is my most recent sharing about boundaries. Namaste.